Welcome to the Anchorage Museum here in Anchorage, Alaska. Pictured in front of us are a number of landscape paintings by various Alaskan artists, including the most famous of all, Sydney Laurence. And of particular note, we are looking at here, both in a photograph in the foreground and the background, two of the paintings that Sydney Laurence did when he first painted Mt.McKinley. In fact, this particular painting here at the museum in Anchorage is the very first painting of Mt.McKinley that Sydney Laurence completed in the year of 1913. And interestingly, this photograph of another painting that he completed in 1914, but was also concurrently painting there in 1913, is one that went to the Smithsonian Institution and remained there for 50 years until it ended up in private hands and is, for all practical purposes, lost to the public. However, we do have this one photograph that was taken in color when it was put up for auction after it left the Smithsonian Institution. The story behind these two paintings and how it came to be that Sydney Laurence began painting the Mount McKinley is of some particular interest and note. In 1913, he was living in Valdez, Alaska, after having spent a decade prospecting in Alaska trying to find gold. During that decade, he had arrived in Alaska in 1903. He was unsuccessful in actually finding a significant quantity of gold. And so he was basically living in a situation where, as he would term it, he called himself broke. When he was in Valdez, though, some friends appreciated the fact that his capabilities for painting, because they'd seen some of the paintings he'd done during that period of time and given to some friends. And they convinced him that he should go to Mount McKinley and paint a large painting of the mountain that could be donated to the Smithsonian Institution and more specifically to the Panama-Pacific World's Fair or International Exposition, as it was termed, that was going to be held there in San Francisco in 1915. He accepted that challenge and took the money that they offered him and traveled to within 10 miles of Mount McKinley, at which point he pulled out his artist tools and sketched in color and oils 40-some sketches of Mount McKinley there in proximity during that particular summer of 1913. He then returned to Valdez, where he was living at the time, and completed two paintings based on those sketches. The one is the one that went to the Smithsonian Institution, a large 6 by 8 foot painting known as Top of the Continent. That's the one we have a photograph of here, right here. This photograph is probably the only available color photograph that we know of today. The painting itself has been lost to the public because it ended up in the hands of private collectors, private owners, after it left the Smithsonian. We do have, however, the other painting that he painted, which is of course smaller, and that is only titled simply Mount McKinley, but it's given the date of 1913. And inasmuch as it was in fact completed before the larger painting, even though they were painted from the same sources, it qualifies as the first painting that Sydney Laurence did of Mount McKinley. Interestingly, this particular painting was given to a gentleman, Mr. Dickey, William Dickey, who had been one of those to help provide funds that allowed this particular painting to make it to the Smithsonian Institution, the larger painting, the Smithsonian. And so Sydney Laurence, in gratitude for his efforts, gave him this smaller painting as a gift, and it remained in the Dickey family for many, many years. In fact, it was displayed in a club in Seattle for a period of time, but mostly remained in their home. After Mr. Dickey had passed away, his children made it available for sale through a bookstore there in Seattle. In fact, it was one of the oldest bookstores in the city. And eventually, some 30 plus years after that, that particular painting somehow ended up here at the museum. Apparently in 1988, it was acquired by the museum. And as we look at this particular painting, It's also of note that Mr. Dickey just happened to be the individual who named Mount McKinley. He was a geologist and a prospector and an explorer who entered into the Susitna Valley and was able to appreciate the magnificence of the mountain when it was relatively unknown in the rest of the world. And he suggested the name of Mount McKinley, which was accepted at the time, and that's ironic, but quite interesting that the individual who named the mountain is the one who had possession of the very first Mount McKinley painting that Sydney Laurence, in fact, had painted.